Sometimes a moment of pure joy can shatter a carefully constructed lie that's been hiding in plain sight for years. For Isabella Moreau, a 28-year-old housekeeper struggling to support her ailing father, dancing with two beautiful children was simply an act of love. For Alexandra Sterling, a ruthless tech mogul worth $4.7 billion, it was the moment she discovered that everything she believed about her family was built on deception, betrayal, and a secret that would destroy the empire she'd spent her life building. This isn't a heartwarming story about kindness. This is the story of how a spontaneous kitchen dance revealed a conspiracy that reached back 15 years and threatened to expose the darkest chapter of one of America's most powerful dynasties. The polished granite floors of the Sterling estate gleamed under the soft morning light filtering through towering windows that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. At 6:15 a.m., the 52,000 square foot mansion in Carmel by the Sea was supposed to be silent, its inhabitants still lost in sleep. Alexandra Sterling preferred these quiet hours before dawn. They allowed her to think, to strategize, to maintain the iron control that had transformed Sterling Dynamics from her father's regional tech company into a global artificial intelligence empire. But as she descended the sweeping staircase toward her private office, dressed in her usual black workout attire before her morning run, she heard something that made her pause. Laughter. Children's laughter, bright and unrestrained, echoing from the direction of the kitchen wing. Alexandra's jaw tightened. Her 4-year-old twins, Sophia and Sebastian, were supposed to be asleep for another hour and 15 minutes. Their live-in nanny, Miss Crawford, ran the household with military precision, exact schedules, structured routines, no deviation from protocol. The sound of their voices at this hour was not just irregular, it was completely unacceptable. She moved silently down the marble hallway, her athletic shoes making no sound on the cold stone. The laughter grew louder, accompanied by music, something upbeat and melodic that seemed completely foreign to the carefully curated classical playlist that usually provided ambient sound throughout her home. As Alexandra approached the kitchen's arched entrance, she could make out words in Spanish, a language that had never been spoken in the Sterling household. Her frown deepened. None of the staff were authorized to bring personal music devices into the working areas of the house, and certainly not to play them at volumes that could wake the children. She reached the doorway and stopped dead in her tracks. Isabella Moreau, the young woman who had been part of the weekly cleaning crew for the past 3 months, was spinning gracefully in the center of the vast gourmet kitchen, her long auburn hair flowing freely from what was usually a strict professional bun. Sophia was perched on her hip, her small face radiant with pure delight, while Sebastian held onto Isabella's free hand, attempting to match her elegant steps. The three of them moved together in perfect synchronization to a lilting Spanish song playing from Isabella's phone, which sat on the marble island counter. For a moment, just one unguarded moment, Alexandra forgot to be angry. She had never seen her children look so genuinely happy. Sophia's green eyes sparkled with uninhibited joy, and Sebastian, usually so serious and contemplative like his mother, was laughing with an abandon that made him look truly childlike for the first time in months. But the moment shattered quickly. This was her domain, her rules, her children, and this woman was violating every boundary Alexandra had meticulously established to maintain order and control in her personal life. What exactly is happening here? Alexandra's voice cut through the music like a blade through silk. The dancing stopped as if someone had pressed a pause button on reality. Isabella's face drained of color as she quickly and carefully set Sophia down, stepping back and smoothing her hair with hands that had begun to tremble. The children's laughter died instantly, replaced by the familiar cautious expression they wore whenever their mother entered a room unexpectedly. "Miss Sterling," Isabella stammered, reaching immediately for her phone to silence the music. "I am so very sorry. The children, they said they could not sleep. They were hungry. And I was simply trying to—" "You were simply trying to what? Transform my kitchen into some sort of dance studio?" Alexandra stepped fully into the room, her presence immediately commanding the entire space. At 5 feet 8 inches with platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail and ice-blue eyes that had intimidated countless business rivals, she was an imposing figure even in workout clothes. "I don't employ you to provide entertainment for my children, Miss Moreau. Your function here is to clean and maintain the household to specified standards." Sophia, still flushed with excitement, tugged insistently on Isabella's simple black dress. "Please don't be angry with Bella, Mama. She was teaching us the sunshine dance." The sunshine dance. Alexandra's tone could have frozen the Pacific Ocean, but something flickered in her expression, a recognition she couldn't quite identify or explain, like our other mama used to do. Sebastian added quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "Bella knows our other mama's special dance." The words hit Alexandra like a physical blow to the chest. Vivienne Sterling, her late wife, had died in a private plane crash 2.5 years ago. The children had been barely 18 months old at the time of the accident, far too young to retain any meaningful memories of Vivienne's behaviors or preferences. "That's completely impossible," Alexandra said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You children have no memory of Vivienne dancing. You were infants when she died." But as she spoke, Alexandra noticed that Isabella's face had transformed from pale to ashen white. The young woman was staring at Alexandra with an expression that was impossible to interpret. Certainly fear, but layered with something else, something that looked disturbingly like recognition, guilt, and a deep, profound sadness. "I should leave immediately," Isabella said quickly, her slight French accent becoming more pronounced under stress as she began gathering her cleaning supplies with shaking hands. "I apologize profusely for this disruption, Miss Sterling. I give you my word that such unprofessional behavior will never occur again." "Stop." The single word came out more sharply than Alexandra had intended. Isabella froze completely, her back still turned toward her employer. "How do you know about my wife's dancing?" Isabella turned slowly, her dark brown eyes wide with what could only be described as panic. "I truly do not understand what you mean, Miss Sterling." But Alexandra could see with perfect clarity that Isabella was lying, and suddenly fragments of memories she had buried began surfacing. Vivienne coming home late on certain evenings, claiming she had been at the spa or attending charity committee meetings. Phone conversations she would take in her private study with the door closed. Her inexplicable knowledge of French phrases and cultural references that seemed too authentic for someone who claimed to have learned them from language learning apps. "Mama," Sophia said, her small hand now tugging on Alexandra's black leggings. "Bella sings our other mama's special song too, the one about the butterfly that flies to heaven." Alexandra's world tilted dangerously. Vivienne used to sing a haunting French lullaby to the twins when they were babies. "Papillon du ciel." about a butterfly's journey to heaven. She had claimed it was something her grandmother in Provence had taught her, though Vivienne's family had been from Boston and had never lived in France. She studied Isabella Moreau with new intensity, truly examining her for the first time since she had begun working in the house. Isabella was perhaps in her late 20s, with the kind of classical European beauty that belonged in Renaissance paintings. Her auburn hair caught the morning light streaming through the kitchen windows, and her brown eyes held depths of intelligence, pain and unmistakable kindness that seemed somehow familiar. Too familiar. "Where exactly did you learn that song?" Alexandra asked, her voice taking on the dangerous quiet that her business competitors had learned to fear. Isabella's hands trembled visibly as she clutched her cleaning supplies closer to her chest. "Many people know such songs, Miss Sterling. They are traditional French lullabies." "That's not what I asked you." Alexandra moved closer, and Isabella instinctively pressed back against the marble counter. "I asked specifically where you learned it, and I want the complete truth." For several long seconds the kitchen was absolutely silent except for the sound of the children's breathing and the distant crash of ocean waves against the cliffs below the house. Then Isabella raised her chin slightly, and Alexandra saw a flash of something fierce and proud in her eyes, a strength and dignity that reminded her powerfully of someone she couldn't quite place. "My sister taught it to me," Isabella said quietly, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "Your sister?" Alexandra repeated the word slowly, tasting something bitter and wrong. "And where is your sister now, Miss Moreau?" Isabella's carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at Sophia and Sebastian, who were watching the exchange between the adults with confused and increasingly worried expressions. "She is dead, Miss Sterling," Isabella whispered, her voice breaking on the words. "She died 2 years and 8 months ago." The words struck Alexandra like lightning. 2 years and 8 months ago. Almost exactly when Vivienne had died in that plane crash. But that was impossible. Vivienne had been her wife, her partner, the center of her world. She couldn't have had a sister that Alexandra had never heard of, never met, never even knew existed. Could she? Alexandra's analytical mind began racing through inconsistencies she had chosen to overlook during their 5-year marriage. Vivienne's reluctance to discuss her childhood in any detail, the fact that none of her supposed family members had attended their wedding. She had claimed they were estranged due to religious differences about her sexuality. Her periodic disappearances for business trips that never seemed to have any concrete results. Her knowledge of French culture, cuisine and customs that seemed too authentic and deep for someone who claimed to have learned about France only through books and documentaries. "What was your sister's name?" Alexandra asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would fundamentally destroy everything she thought she knew about her life. Isabella looked at her with eyes full of pain, love, and what might have been pity. "Vivienne," she said simply. Her name was Vivienne Moreau. The revelation hit Alexandra like a tsunami. Vivienne Moreau, not Vivienne Dubois, the identity she had used when they first met at a technology conference in San Francisco. Her wife, the woman she had fallen in love with, married in an intimate ceremony, had children with, had been living under a completely false identity throughout their entire relationship. But why? What could she possibly have been hiding that required such an elaborate deception? And more terrifyingly, what else had she lied about during their years together? Alexandra staggered backward until she hit the kitchen island, gripping its edge to steady herself. That's impossible. Vivienne's maiden name was Dubois. I've seen her birth certificate, her passport, her university transcripts. Isabella's laugh was bitter and broken, filled with years of suppressed grief. My sister was extraordinarily talented at creating new identities, Miss Sterling. She had to be, to survive. But her real name was Vivienne Celeste Moreau. She was born in a small clinic in Marseille, not in Quebec City as she told you, and she was my older sister, not some orphan with no family connections. The kitchen felt like it was spinning around Alexandra. She pressed her palms flat against the cool marble, trying to anchor herself to something solid and real. Why are you telling me this? What exactly do you want from me? I want nothing from you, Isabella said, her voice gaining strength and conviction. I have been trying to find the courage to tell you the truth for many months now. Vivienne made me promise to stay away, to never contact you or the children under any circumstances. But when I got this position through the cleaning service and discovered by pure chance that it was your house, she gestured helplessly with hands that were no longer shaking. I could not stay away from Sophia and Sebastian. They are all I have left of her in this world. Alexandra felt the last vestiges of her certainty crumbling like sand. You've been watching my children, deliberately, for months. I have been loving them, Isabella corrected with sudden fierce intensity, the way Vivienne would have wanted me to, the way she made me promise to do if anything ever happened to her. She asked you to. Alexandra couldn't finish the sentence. The implications were too enormous, too devastating to fully process. Sophia, who had been quietly listening to the adult conversation she didn't fully understand, suddenly broke away from Sebastian and ran to Isabella, wrapping her small arms around the woman's legs with complete trust and affection. Don't cry, Bella, she said softly, looking up with concern. Mama's not really mean. She's just scared like you are. And in that moment, Alexandra saw it clearly for the first time. The resemblance she had been unconsciously missing, the familiarity that had nagged at the edges of her consciousness every time she had glimpsed Isabella working quietly in her house. Sophia had Isabella's eyes, the same deep brown color, the same long dark lashes, the same expression of fierce protectiveness and unconditional love. But more than that, Sophia had Vivienne's eyes, because Vivienne and Isabella were sisters, which meant her children had an aunt they had never been told about, family they had been denied, a living connection to their deceased mother that she had unknowingly severed by keeping Isabella at a professional distance and treating her as nothing more than hired help. Get out, Alexandra said quietly, her voice hollow with shock and growing rage. Isabella nodded without surprise, as if she had been expecting this reaction. She knelt down carefully and kissed both children gently on their foreheads, her tears falling freely. Now, be good for your mama, she whispered in French. And always remember your other mama loved you more than all the stars in the sky. She gathered her cleaning supplies and headed toward the kitchen service entrance, but Alexandra's voice stopped her just before she reached the door. This conversation is not finished, Miss Moreau. I want answers, all of them. Isabella turned back one final time, and for the first time since Alexandra had discovered her dancing, she looked her directly in the eyes with something that might have been defiance. So do I, Miss Sterling, she said steadily, because Vivienne did not just lie to you about her name and her family. She lied about why she had to disappear from her real life in the first place. And I believe you already know who she was running from. With that cryptic statement hanging in the air like a challenge, Isabella Moreau walked out of the kitchen, leaving Alexandra Sterling alone with her children, and the devastating realization that her entire adult life might be built on an elaborate foundation of lies. The rest of the morning passed in a surreal haze of disbelief and steadily growing dread. Alexandra cancelled all her scheduled meetings, instructing her assistant to reschedule everything for the remainder of the week and to inform callers that she was dealing with a family emergency. She needed time to think, to process, to understand what was happening to her carefully controlled world. But first she needed to verify Isabella's shocking claims about Vivienne's true identity. In her private study, a climate-controlled room lined with first-edition books and dominated by a mahogany desk that had belonged to her grandfather, Alexandra retrieved the locked filing cabinet where she kept Vivienne's personal documents: birth certificate, social security card, passport, university, all bearing the name Vivienne Marie Dubois. She had never had any reason to doubt their authenticity. But now, examining them with the suspicious analytical mind she usually reserved for corporate acquisitions and competitive intelligence, Alexandra began noticing discrepancies she had overlooked before. The birth certificate was a certified copy rather than an original document. The social security number, when she ran it through her company's private verification databases, came back clean but with a creation date that seemed suspiciously recent for someone who was supposed to be Vivienne's age when they met. With mounting unease, Alexandra opened her laptop and began conducting a deeper investigation. Vivienne Dubois' paper trail was remarkably thin for someone who was supposed to have lived 29 years before entering Alexandra's life. A high school diploma from a preparatory school in Montreal that, when she called using her corporate credentials, claimed to have no record of her attendance. A university transcript from McGill University that appeared legitimate until she noticed the enrollment date was only 8 months before they had first met at that technology conference. It was as if Vivienne Dubois had been methodically created specifically to intersect with Alexandra's life. But Vivienne Moreau, that name yielded immediate and extensive results. Birth records from Marseille, school transcripts spanning her entire educational career, even archived social media profiles with photographs that were unmistakably her late wife, just younger, and surrounded by people Alexandra had never seen before. The Vivienne Moreau, who emerged from her research, was vibrant, socially connected, surrounded by a large extended family and numerous friends. So why had she abandoned her real identity to become someone else entirely? What had driven her to construct such an elaborate false persona? Alexandra was deep in her research when her secure phone rang with a call that made her stomach clench with apprehension. The caller ID displayed a name she had hoped never to see again: Cameron Blackwood, her former head of security, who now ran his own private investigation firm. Cameron, Alexandra answered cautiously. "This is unexpected. We need to meet immediately," Cameron said without any social pleasantries. His voice carried the same urgent intensity she remembered from his years managing security for Sterling Dynamics. "Not over the phone. Can you be at Pebble Beach Golf Links in 30 minutes? The private dining room overlooking the 18th hole." Pebble Beach was where Cameron had always insisted on conducting their most sensitive conversations during his tenure with her company, a location that was regularly swept for surveillance devices and offered complete privacy for discussing corporate espionage and competitive threats. "What is this concerning? Isabella Moreau," Cameron said bluntly. "You've been making inquiries about her background, and those inquiries have triggered alerts with some very dangerous people. People who have been watching the Moreau family for years." Alexandra's blood turned to ice. She had used her company's private investigation resources to run a standard background check on Isabella when she had first started working in the house. Routine procedure for anyone who gained access to her private residence. But today's deeper search into the Moreau family history might have activated monitoring systems she hadn't known existed. "What kind of people?" "The kind who work for your mother," Cameron said grimly. 30 minutes, Alexandra. Don't be late, and come alone." The line went dead, leaving Alexandra staring at her phone with a growing sense that she had stumbled into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple case of mistaken identity. Her mother, Catherine Sterling, the iron-willed matriarch who had built Sterling Dynamics from a small software company into a global empire before passing control to Alexandra. Catherine had officially retired 5 years ago, but maintained extensive influence through her position as chairman emeritus of the board. She was brilliant, ruthless, and completely without sentiment when it came to protecting what she viewed as the family's interests. What could Catherine possibly have to do with the Moreau sisters? 30 minutes later, Alexandra sat across from Cameron Blackwood in a private dining room that offered sweeping views of the Pacific Ocean. Cameron was a lean man in his early 50s with the kind of quiet, predatory alertness that came from years of military intelligence work before entering the corporate security field. "Tell me about Vivienne Moreau," Cameron said without preamble, sliding a thin manila folder across the polished table. Alexandra opened it to find surveillance photographs that made her heart stop. The images showed Vivienne, but not as the elegant, sophisticated woman Alexandra had known and married. These photographs captured Vivienne at what appeared to be protests and political rallies, surrounded by signs in French, demanding justice for families displaced by development projects. In several pictures, she was standing beside Isabella, both sisters wearing matching expressions of determined anger and shared purpose. "Where did you obtain these?" "That's the wrong question," Cameron said, his expression grave. "The right question is why someone has been maintaining an active surveillance file on the Moreau sisters for the past decade. 10 years. That was 5 years before Alexandra had even met Vivienne. Who has been conducting this surveillance?" Cameron leaned back in his leather chair, his expression darker than Alexandra had ever seen it. "A private military contractor called Titan Security Solutions. On the surface they appear to be a legitimate corporate protection service, but when you dig deeper into their client base and operational history, you discover contracts with some extremely questionable organizations and individuals." Alexandra felt a chill of recognition spreading through her chest. "Titan Security Solutions. I've encountered that name before." "You should have. Your mother has been using their services for 15 years. The word struck Alexandra like a physical blow. Catherine Sterling, her brilliant and ruthless mother, had been secretly monitoring the Moreau family for a decade. But why? What possible threat could 2 young French women pose to one of America's most powerful technology dynasties? My mother has been retired from active business operations for 5 years, Alexandra said slowly, though even as she spoke the words, she knew they were naive. Why would she still be running surveillance operations on private citizens? Cameron pulled out a second folder, this one significantly thicker and marked with security classifications that made Alexandra's pulse quicken. Because the Moreau family represented a direct threat to your mother's business empire, and apparently that threat didn't disappear when Catherine stepped down from day-to-day operations. The folder contained documents that made Alexandra feel physically sick. Government contracts that Sterling Dynamics had secured through what appeared to be systematic bribery and political manipulation. Environmental regulations that had been circumvented through intimidation of regulatory officials. And most damning of all, detailed records of the Montpellier waterfront development project, a massive urban renewal initiative in southern France that had displaced over 3,000 low-income families to make way for luxury resort properties. What does this have to do with Vivienne and Isabella? The Moreau family lived in Montpellier, Cameron said quietly. Their parents, Dr. Philippe Moreau and his wife Celeste, ran a community medical clinic that was providing free health care to the families your mother's development project was targeting for displacement. They were organizing legal resistance, getting international media attention, building a coalition that could have stopped the entire project. Alexandra felt pieces of a horrifying puzzle clicking into place. What happened to their parents? Cameron's expression became even grimmer. According to the official French investigation, Dr. Philippe and Celeste Moreau died in a gas leak explosion at their medical clinic. The authorities determined it was an accident, faulty renovation work on the building's heating system combined with inadequate ventilation. Case officially closed. But you don't believe it was an accident. I believe your mother has always been exceptionally skilled at eliminating obstacles to her business objectives. And I believe Vivienne Moreau spent years trying to prove that her parents were murdered. Alexandra stared at the surveillance photographs of her late wife, seeing Vivienne's passionate activism and political engagement in an entirely new context. She was investigating their deaths. More than investigating, she was building a comprehensive legal case. The clinic explosion wasn't the only suspicious accident connected to your mother's international development projects. There was a clear pattern, Alexandra, a methodical, deadly pattern of eliminating opposition through events that appeared to be tragic coincidences. The private dining room seemed to be spinning around Alexandra. She gripped the edge of the table, struggling to process the magnitude of what Cameron was revealing. You're telling me my mother is responsible for murdering Vivienne's parents. I'm telling you that Catherine Sterling has never allowed personal sentiment to interfere with business objectives. And Vivienne Moreau was getting dangerously close to exposing a network of corruption that could have destroyed Sterling Dynamics' international operations. So Vivienne what? Seduced me as part of some elaborate revenge scheme? Cameron shook his head decisively. The timeline doesn't support that theory. Vivienne had already created the Dubois identity and gone underground by the time she encountered you at that conference. I believe meeting you was genuinely accidental, but staying with you, marrying you, having children with you, he shrugged. Perhaps she thought she could gather evidence from inside the Sterling family, or perhaps she simply fell in love and believed she could escape her past by building a new life. Alexandra thought about Vivienne's behavior during their marriage, her occasional unexplained absences, her reluctance to discuss her family background, her insistence on maintaining certain areas of privacy that Alexandra had attributed to an independent personality. But what if Vivienne had been continuing her investigation throughout their relationship? What if she had been systematically gathering evidence against Catherine Sterling even while living under her son's roof and sharing her bed? There's more. Cameron said, producing a final document that made Alexandra's world tilt completely off its axis. Vivienne Sterling didn't die in a random mechanical failure of her private aircraft. Alexandra's vision blurred. What are you saying? The crash investigation report contains multiple inconsistencies that were never adequately explained. Mechanical failures that seemed too convenient and comprehensive. A flight path that deviated from the filed plan for no apparent reason. And most significantly, evidence that someone had accessed the aircraft's maintenance records in the weeks before the crash. Evidence that was ignored. Evidence that was suppressed by investigators who had financial connections to Catherine Sterling's business network. Cameron slid the crash analysis across the table. Vivienne's plane didn't suffer a mechanical failure, Alexandra. It was sabotaged. Alexandra stared at the technical document, the words becoming meaningless symbols as the full horror of the situation crystallized in her mind. Her mother hadn't just ordered the deaths of Vivienne's parents in France, she had murdered Vivienne herself, while Vivienne was married to her own daughter, and raising her grandchildren. She must have discovered something, Alexandra whispered, evidence that would have exposed everything. Evidence that could still destroy your family's business empire and reputation, Cameron corrected. Your mother may be in her 70s, but the statute of limitations on murder doesn't expire, and if Vivienne was correct about the pattern of deaths connected to Sterling Dynamics International projects, he didn't need to complete the thought. If Vivienne had assembled proof that Catherine Sterling was responsible for multiple murders disguised as accidents across several countries, it would annihilate everything. The Sterling family name, the business empire, Alexandra's own carefully constructed reputation as an ethical tech leader. Even Sophia and Sebastian would grow up under the shadow of their grandmother's crimes. Where is the evidence now? Alexandra asked, her voice hollow. Cameron's expression was grimmer than ever. That's what Isabella Moreau has been trying to discover, and it's why she's been under active surveillance by Titan security. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Isabella hadn't accepted the housekeeping job by chance. She had been systematically trying to find whatever evidence Vivienne had collected before her murder. Evidence that could finally bring justice for her parents and her sister. But someone else was searching for it as well, someone with unlimited resources and a powerful motivation to ensure it never surfaced. Who else knows about this? Alexandra asked. Cameron hesitated for a moment, then pulled out one final photograph. It showed a woman in an expensive business suit standing outside Alexandra's estate, speaking on a satellite phone. Alexandra recognized her immediately. It was her younger sister, Penelope Sterling Ashford. Penelope, the charming socialite who managed the Sterling family's charitable foundation and political connections. Penelope, who had access to all of their mother's private files and historical business records. Penelope, who would lose her privileged lifestyle and social status if the truth about Catherine Sterling's criminal activities became public knowledge. How long has Penelope been involved? Alexandra asked quietly. I've suspected her involvement for months, but I needed concrete evidence before bringing this to your attention. Cameron gathered the files systematically. Alexandra, your sister isn't just helping to bury your mother's past. She's actively hunting anyone who might threaten the family's interests. Isabella Moreau is in immediate danger, and now that you've been asking questions about the Moreau family, he didn't need to finish the thought. Alexandra understood perfectly. By discovering the truth about Vivienne's identity, by connecting with Isabella, she had painted targets on both their backs. Her own sister was prepared to commit murder to protect the family's secrets, just as their mother had done before her. Alexandra stood abruptly, her mind racing with the implications and her heart pounding with a combination of rage and terror. I have to warn Isabella, you need to be extremely careful, Cameron warned, his voice urgent. Penelope has access to resources and operational capabilities you've never seen, and she's had years to prepare for this exact contingency. But Alexandra was already moving toward the door, her thoughts focused entirely on the woman who had danced with her children in her kitchen that morning, the woman who had loved Sophia and Sebastian enough to risk everything just to be near them, the woman who was the last living connection to Vivienne and the only person who might be able to help her understand what her wife had really been fighting for. For the first time in her life, something mattered more to Alexandra than her business empire or her family's reputation. She had to protect the woman who held the key to finally bringing justice for all of Catherine Sterling's victims, the woman who might be the only person who could help her transform her family's legacy from one of corruption and murder to one of truth and redemption. Part 1 ends with Alexandra racing through the coastal highways of California to find Isabella, unaware that Penelope's surveillance team is already closing in on both women, and that the evidence Vivienne died protecting is hidden in the last place anyone would think to look, in a safety deposit box registered under the names of two 4-year-old children who believe it contains nothing more than special treasures their deceased mother wanted them to have when they grew up. Alexandra rushed to Isabella's apartment, her mind reeling from Cameron's revelations. Her mother, Catherine Sterling, wasn't just ruthless, she was a murderer who had killed Vivienne and her parents to protect the family empire. When she arrived, Isabella was packing frantically. "We have to leave," Isabella said. "Your sister Penelope knows we've been talking. The children are safer without you right now," Isabella interrupted, showing Alexandra a leather portfolio. "Vivienne documented everything. Your mother ordered multiple murders across 4 countries. I have recordings, financial records, witness testimonies." Alexandra's phone buzzed, a text from Penelope demanding her presence at the family's charity gala that evening. "They know," Alexandra whispered. Isabella pulled out a digital recorder. "Listen to this." Catherine's voice filled the room. "The Moreau problem needs to be resolved permanently. The daughter is getting too close to the truth. Make it look like an accident, but ensure there's no possibility of survival." Alexandra's legs gave out. Her mother had casually ordered Vivienne's death, referring to her own daughter-in-law as a problem. "We go public tonight," Isabella said firmly. "At the gala, live television, media coverage. They can't suppress the truth if the whole world is watching." The Sterling Foundation gala glittered with false elegance. Alexandra entered as expected, while Isabella used staff credentials to gain access. The ballroom was packed with politicians, celebrities and journalists. Catherine held court near the podium, radiant in her role as philanthropist. Penelope worked the crowd with practiced charm until she spotted Alexandra. "Where are the children?" Penelope asked, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Safe from you," Alexandra replied loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. The conversation attracted attention. A journalist began recording as Alexandra moved toward the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexandra announced, her voice carrying across the ballroom, "I'd like to share some discoveries about my family's business practices." "Alexandra, this isn't appropriate," Catherine said sharply. "You're right, this isn't about business. This is about murder." The crowd gasped. Isabella emerged from the staff area, portfolio in hand. "This woman is Isabella Moreau," Alexandra continued. "Her sister was my late wife Vivienne. Her parents died in an explosion that was not an accident. It was ordered by Catherine Sterling." "Lies," Penelope hissed, but Alexandra was already playing the recording. Catherine's voice boomed through the sound system. admitting to ordering Vivienne's death. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. "That's doctored," Catherine protested desperately. "There are 12 more recordings," Isabella announced. 12 conversations where Catherine Sterling discusses murdering people who threatened her business. Penelope finally snapped. "You naive fool. Do you know what we've built, what we've sacrificed?" "I know exactly what you've sacrificed," Alexandra said coldly. "Other people's lives." Police sirens wailed outside. Isabella held up a USB drive. "I'm uploading everything to the FBI, French authorities, and WikiLeaks simultaneously. The truth cannot be buried anymore." Catherine's composure cracked completely. "I built an empire. I did what was necessary." The confession, broadcast live, sealed her fate. 6 months later, Catherine received life in prison. Alexandra had surrendered the company to establish the Moreau Justice Foundation. In their modest new home, she watched Isabella dance with Sophia and Sebastian in the kitchen, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. The simple dance that started everything had brought down a criminal empire and given them something more valuable than wealth, the truth, and each other.